What's the matter?
Nothing, son. Run inside. In the pocket of my old coat, you'll find a bottle.
The kilogram?
My tonic.
Hollywood was built on perfection, flawless faces, golden dreams, happy endings. But behind that shine were stars who carried pain the camera never showed. Some faced paralysis or blindness. Others lived with scars, silence, or broken bodies. Different wounds, one truth. They never stopped creating.
It had been nearly 6 weeks since I'd held anything under my own control, and that had been half a pound of TNT in North Carolina. I got quite a kick out of holding that pencil.
Harold Russell, the soldier who inspired Hollywood. Harold Russell never planned to be an actor. He was a U.S. Army sergeant training for war when, in 1944, an explosive charge went off in his hands, and both were lost in an instant. He recovered slowly, learning to live with mechanical hooks instead of fingers. What could have ended his life became the start of his legacy. Russell faced the world with quiet pride, refusing to hide his injuries. He appeared in the Army Short Diary of a Sergeant, 1945, made to inspire other wounded soldiers, and it changed everything. Director William Wyler saw the film and was moved. He cast Russell in The Best Years of Our Lives, 1946, about veterans returning home. Russell played a version of himself, a man relearning simple acts like buttoning a shirt or lighting a cigarette, and did it with unguarded honesty. Audiences wept, critics stood in awe. At the 1947 Oscars, Russell achieved the impossible: 2 Academy Awards for one role, Best Supporting Actor, and a special award for inspiring his fellow veterans. He later said, acting wasn't his greatest achievement. Living was. For the rest of his life, he championed disabled veterans, proving that dignity doesn't depend on limbs, but on spirit. Harold Russell showed the world that courage doesn't need hands to hold on to life, only a heart that refuses to let go. Montgomery Clift, The Broken Mirror. Some stars are marked not by the roles they play, but by what life carves into them. For Montgomery Clift, beauty was both his gift and his cross. And the night fate shattered it, he found a deeper kind of truth. In the 1940s, Clift wasn't just a movie star. He was a revelation. Sensitive, intelligent, quietly intense, he embodied a new kind of masculinity. Critics called him the face of vulnerability itself. Then, in May 1956, that face was shattered. Leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home, he crashed his car into a telephone pole. His jaw and cheekbones were crushed. Surgeons rebuilt him piece by piece. One side of his face stayed partially paralyzed. His speech slowed, and his once effortless grace turned heavy with pain. Hollywood, which had worshipped his perfection, didn't know what to do with imperfection. But Clift refused to vanish. He came back stronger. In The Misfits and Judgment at Nuremberg, he didn't hide the damage. He used it. Every tremor and shadow became part of his art. Critics called him the wounded angel of Hollywood. Clift once said, "The only line worth saying is the one you believe." He lived that creed until the end, proof that beauty can break and still remain beautiful, that sometimes the cracks in the mirror let the light through. Lionel Barrymore, acting through the pain. By the 1930s, Lionel Barrymore was already a monument to Hollywood's golden age, brother to John Barrymore and great-uncle to Drew. Born into acting royalty, he seemed destined to rule the stage and screen forever. But fate had other plans. Chronic arthritis struck in the late 1920s, soon followed by a hip injury that left him in constant agony. By the mid-1930s, he could no longer walk and spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Most would have retired, but Lionel refused. He rolled himself onto sets and worked with undiminished authority. His sharp intellect and commanding voice became his tools. In It's a Wonderful Life, 1946, he played the miserly Mr. Potter. Audiences saw a villain, never realizing the wheelchair wasn't a prop, but his reality. Behind the camera, Barrymore stayed witty and kind, never seeking pity. When asked how he endured, he simply said, "You don't stop living because you hurt. You just change the way you do it." He proved that strength isn't in perfection, but persistence. When the cameras rolled, Lionel Barrymore wasn't a man in a wheelchair. He was the heart of every scene. Jane Wyman, the quiet power of silence. For Jane Wyman, strength came not from motion or volume, but from stillness. She built her legacy not by speaking louder than others, but by showing how silence itself could move an audience to tears. She began quietly as a chorus girl and uncredited extra, one of thousands waiting for a single chance. What set her apart wasn't scandal, but discipline, a calm drive that outlasted the studio system. Her breakthrough came with Johnny Belinda, 1948. Playing a deaf-mute woman with no lines or glamour, she stunned audiences and won the Academy Award for Best Actress. Accepting it, she joked, "I accept this very graciously, for keeping my mouth shut for once. I think I deserve it." Behind the humor was truth. Jane understood silence not as emptiness, but as strength. Later in life, she faced partial hearing loss, a quiet echo of her most famous role. Yet, never slowed down. She reinvented herself on television in Falcon Crest, commanding the screen again, now as a matriarch instead of an ingenue. Off-screen, she was known for grace and independence. Once married to Ronald Reagan long before the White House, she never used the connection. Asked about it years later, she smiled. "It's not every woman who gets to be First Lady twice." Through every decade, Jane Wyman proved that real strength doesn't roar. It whispers, steady, dignified, unforgettable, long after the lights fade. James Stewart, the sound of courage. James Stewart didn't wear his wounds where people could see them. His were quieter, carried home from war, hidden behind that gentle smile and steady voice that America had come to love. Tall, soft-spoken, and endlessly sincere, Stewart became Hollywood's moral compass, the man who always stood for what was right. In Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and It's a Wonderful Life, he wasn't just acting, he was showing the best of the American spirit. But his real courage was forged above Europe. During World War II, already a major star, Stewart joined the U.S. Army Air Corps, flew 20 combat missions over Nazi territory, and returned a decorated colonel, older, quieter, forever changed. Years of roaring engines left him partially deaf. For an actor, it was a quiet tragedy, yet Stewart adapted. He learned to read lips, to trust instinct more than hearing. What he lost in sound, he gained in soul. You can feel that transformation in Vertigo and Anatomy of a Murder. A man no longer playing heroism, but living it. When asked about aging and hearing loss, he smiled, "It's part of life. You can either grow bitter or grow better." And, as always, he grew better. James Stewart's courage wasn't about flying planes or playing heroes. It was about meeting silence with grace, proving that true strength can whisper and still be heard. Esmond Knight, the blind visionary. Esmond Knight was already one of Britain's most respected actors when World War II changed his life forever. Born in 1906 in Surrey, he built a steady career through the 1930s, admired for his intelligence, poise, and unmistakable stage presence. In May 1941, while serving aboard the battleship HMS Prince of Wales during its battle with the Bismarck, Knight was struck by shell fragments that left him almost completely blind. For 2 long years, he lived in darkness, uncertain if he'd ever see or act again. But Knight refused to disappear. Guided by sound and touch, he slowly learned to navigate the world anew. Over time, he regained limited sight in one eye and, against all odds, returned to the screen. His comeback was nothing short of remarkable. Laurence Olivier, deeply moved by Knight's resilience, cast him in Henry V, 1944, and later Hamlet, 1948. Audiences were stunned, not just by his talent, but by the calm, focused power he brought to every scene. His blindness didn't limit him, it deepened him. Offstage, Knight became a symbol of creative perseverance, inspiring countless wounded veterans to rebuild their lives after the war. He proved that even when the body falters, imagination can still lead the way. As he once reflected, it wasn't the eyes that mattered most, but what they saw in the mind and heart. Esmond Knight showed the world that true vision has nothing to do with sight and everything to do with spirit. Susan Peters, the star who wouldn't fade. In the early 1940s, Hollywood believed it had found a new star. Susan Peters, elegant, intelligent, magnetic, had everything. An MGM contract, rave reviews, and an Oscar nomination for Random Harvest, 1942. At just 21, her future seemed limitless. Then, on New Year's Day, 1945, tragedy struck. During a hunting trip with her husband, actor Richard Quine, a rifle accidentally fired. The bullet shattered her spine and left her paralyzed from the waist down. Doctors doubted she'd ever act again, and Hollywood quietly turned away. But Susan refused to disappear. After years of rehabilitation, she returned in The Sign of the Ram, 1948, playing a woman in a wheelchair, not as a victim but as a commanding, complex soul. Critics were stunned by her control and depth. Off-screen, she inspired wounded World War II veterans rebuilding their lives, reminding them that purpose survives even when the body changes. Yet privately, her struggle deepened. Her marriage failed, her health declined, and roles stopped coming. Still, she kept reading scripts, rehearsing, hoping. In 1952, at just 31, Susan Peters died after years of illness and isolation. Her career was brief, but her courage timeless, a portrait of grace under fire. Lon Chaney, the man of 1,000 faces. But even before sound filled the theaters, some learned to express pain through silence itself. Though not disabled himself, Lon Chaney understood pain and isolation better than anyone. Born in 1883 to deaf parents, he grew up in silence, learning sign language before speech, and discovering early that emotion didn't need words. That lesson became the soul of his art. Before Lugosi's Dracula or Karloff's Frankenstein, Chaney ruled the silent shadows. They called him the man of 1,000 faces for good reason. He could become anyone, a phantom, a hunchback, a clown, or a killer. His transformations were so complete that audiences forgot there was a man beneath the mask. He designed his own torturous makeups. For The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1923, he carried a 50-pound hump and bound his legs in braces. For The Phantom of the Opera, 1925, he pulled his nose back with wires and used egg membranes to twist his face into horror. He worked in real pain, yet created images that would outlive sound itself. Chaney never played monsters, only misunderstood souls. Beneath the grotesque, he said, there can be a heart. Audiences cried for his creatures because he made their suffering human. Off camera, he lived quietly, avoiding fame. Between pictures, there is no Lon Chaney, he once said. He died in 1930 at 47 from throat cancer, the cruelest fate for a man who built his world from silence. Lon Chaney's legacy lives on in every actor who has ever hidden pain behind performance, the man who proved that even monsters can feel. Harold Lloyd, the man who kept climbing. In the silent era, Harold Lloyd stood beside Chaplin and Keaton, the third genius of comedy. His bespectacled everyman climbed skyscrapers, dangled from clock towers, and chased dreams with fearless optimism. Then, in 1919, everything almost ended. During a publicity shoot, he picked up what he thought was a harmless prop bomb. It exploded, destroying 2 fingers of his right hand, burning his face and blinding him temporarily. For months, he didn't know if he'd ever act again. But Harold refused to be defined by loss. He wore a special glove to hide the injury and went back to performing his own stunts. Those legendary skyscraper scenes in Safety Last, 1923, they came after the accident. Audiences never knew the man hanging from that clock had only 8 fingers. Behind the laughter was discipline and precision. Lloyd choreographed danger to the inch, not for pity, but perfection. Later he said, "There's nothing to be gained by looking down. You just keep climbing." That line became his life. Harold Lloyd turned pain into courage and risk into art, reminding the world that even after a fall, you can still rise higher than before. Old Hollywood shines in memory, all glamour and applause. But behind that light were stars who carried pain the world never saw. They turned struggle into art, and pain into legacy. Their strength wasn't in perfection, it was in persistence.